After 7 years of severe ties, Saudi Arabia and Iran recently announced restoration of their diplomatic relations. As per the deal brokered by China, the two countries have pledged to reopen their embassies within 2 months and also agreed to renew cooperation in areas such as security and trade. Now, the rapprochement has been greeted with optimism both within the region and outside. In the Gulf region, a majority of countries see it as a significant step towards peace and stability. Both major powers in West Asia, Saudi Arabia and Iran, had been at loggerheads since the 2011 Arab Spring. Both have been involved in proxy fights in Yemen, Lebanon and elsewhere. Their rivalry is often used as a symbol of the broader tensions between Sunni and Shia Muslims and a key feature of politics and conflict in West Asia. Now, with the new agreement between Riyadh and Tehran to renew ties, will there be peace and calm in the region? Also, does the deal address the real dispute? That's the global debate. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teena to talk about what the deal means, its implications and the challenges it may face. I have with me an illustrious panel. So let me begin by introducing my guest to you. I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Ford Azadi, Associate Professor, Faculty of World Studies, University of Tehran. Mr. Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President, Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Dr. Wail Awad, he's a West Asia expert. And former Ambassador, Mr. D.P. Srivastav, he's currently a Distinguished Fellow at the Vivekanand International Foundation. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on the program today on Sansad TV. Mr. Azadi, to you first. What are some of the biggest motivations for Iran in normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia? If you could help us and our viewers understand from your perspective.
You know, when Mr. Raisi was running for presidency, one of his slogans was to improve relations with Iran's neighbors, both political relations and also economic relations. As you know, Iran is under sanctions. Having good relations with the neighborhood would help Iran go around sanctions. And that's where Saudi Arabia comes. Saudis have historically been Iran's friends in the past. And the problem we have had in recent years are generally caused by misunderstandings and maybe the influence of countries like United States and Israel. So it was about time to have normal relations with Saudi Arabia. Saudis have had difficult relations with Iran. Iranian leaders generally considered Saudi Arabia to be a country that could basically help Iran in its regional policies, in its international policy. So overall, I think we have good news. And this is one of the campaign promises of President Raisi, and I think he has managed to do that, managed to fulfill that promise.
Okay, Dr. Awad, as someone who knows the region in and out, from the Saudi perspective, how significant is this deal?
Good evening to you and your distinguished debate panelists. Actually, it is a very win-win situation, not only for the Saudis, for the Iranian, for the Chinese, for the rest of the region, for the global also community. But for Saudi Arabia, it is a major diplomatic gain because Saudi Arabia is trying to gain its position as a geopolitical important country in the region. It's also wanted to be a player in the major player in the internal and regional affairs. And it also will help the Saudis ending 9 years now. We are entering the 9th years of war on Yemen, which is exhausting the Saudi economy. And it's also having a negative impact on the Saudi. So therefore, it is a very a good step in the right direction to normalize relation between the two countries, because Saudi Arabia have been always at the receiving end since the United States and the West have turned Iran into a scarecrow all the time that Iran is going to invade, Iran going to attack. So I think now with this agreement, there must be some sort of reapproachment between the countries, especially before even the holy month of Ramzan, which will cool down the internal fighting between the Muslim Islamic worlds.
Okay, so what the implications will be on the region and how both sides are going to progress is something that we will discuss in just a moment. But Mr. Parsi, coming to you for your perspective, the fact that all the three sides managed to keep it under wraps, it's something that stunned the world. What is the kind of response that you see from strategists and analysts in the United States? Also, how do you look at China's key role in actually brokering peace between two rivals in West Asia?
Well, thank you again for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be here with your panel. It is indeed a tectonic shift. It is not a significant development in and of itself that Saudi Arabia and Iran have a normalization. Saudi-Iranian relations have been going up and down for quite some time. But the fact that China is the mediator is a significant shift and shows that the Middle East is truly turning multipolar. The world is turning multipolar. China has previously not shown the ambition or the capacity to be able to play such a mediating role in the Middle East or anywhere else outside of its own region. And this is going to have significant impact on the region, but beyond, because we know now that she is also going to Moscow next week. Is going to have a conversation with Zelensky as well, perhaps even visiting Kiev. It's a major shift if you suddenly see the Chinese playing the role of mediator, not just in the Middle East, of course, which is a shift in itself, but also later on in the heart of Europe. For the American side, I think they've been taken by surprise. There's an effort to show appreciation because at the end of the day, stability in the Middle East should also be to the benefit of the United States. But there is a grudging frustration or discomfort to see China step in and play this role, I would say. And to a large extent, I think it's the fault of the US itself. It has been pursuing a policy for quite some time now in which the US is a co-belligerent in many of the conflicts in the region. It takes sides in the region rather than taking a neutral position. And by that, it has disabled itself from being able to mediate or even be seen as a mediator. And that has created space for the Chinese to step in. I don't think Washington was worried about it because they didn't suspect China to have that ambition. Now we know that it has that ambition and that it has that capacity. That's going to change a lot of things in how Washington calculates its next moves.
Okay, Ambassador, coming to you for your perspective on the kind of positive outcome that you see this deal making in the West Asian region. You've served in this region and you know it very well. So what positive outcome do you see it bringing? And the second part of the question is about China's emergence in this region as the new peace broker. So expanding its presence from the economic relations to now actually playing peace broker, ensuring truce between these traditional rivals. So in a region where India also has larger stakes in terms of oil supplies, energy supplies, in terms of the huge presence of the Indian diaspora there, is it concerning for India?
Thank you. Let me point out that prospects of peace and stability in the region is something India has always welcomed. Tensions do not help anyone. We have excellent relations on both sides of the Gulf with Saudi Arabia as well as with Iran. I was Indian ambassador there. And 3 decades earlier, I have also served in Saudi Arabia. India gets more than 60% of its crude oil from this region, so any increase in tension does not help us. So it's a positive step, and let's not exaggerate the role of China. At the outset, I must mention China already has major presence, being the largest buyer of crude oil from Saudi Arabia as well as Iran. On the other hand, US, because it is not only self-sufficient, it has recently even exported crude oil, does not have that dependence on the Gulf. So it does not have that complementarity of economic interests that China has. But at the same time, we need not overstate China's position because it has blessed the deal. The deal has been in the work for a long time, and there are other countries which played a role. This includes Oman. There were 4 rounds held in Iraq. So what has happened is the culmination of the deal has been announced in Beijing. It may symbolize for some people a transition of China's role from basically an economic partner to someone which can also play a role in crafting political understanding.
Right.
But as I have mentioned, these bilateral discussions have been in place for a long time between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and this is simply culmination of a process. Both Iran and Saudi Arabia are large, stable countries with their own decision making, and they are not going to fall in the sway of one or the other. Also, let's not forget that the US still has much bigger capacity for power projection in the region than China does. So we are going through a state of flux where there's a change in the great power relations. The regional powers like Saudi Arabia and Iran may not like to get sucked into this competition or conflict between the great powers. So they are essentially following a multi-vector policy, and the latest example of this is that both Iran and Saudi Arabia have chosen Beijing as a venue for announcing the deal, which had been in the pipeline in any case. But we should also keep in mind that this by itself will not lead to tensions going away unless the nuclear deal makes progress. And that is the next step. And we'll have to wait and watch what is the position of the Arab states. One of the obstacles, or which was stated to have kept back the resumption of nuclear deal, was the regional dimension. With this agreement, I think that is out of the way. So let's hope that this deal paves the way for a bigger deal, which will be between Iran and P5+1, including US. And of course, without that deal, US cannot play a mediator's role. The simple reason why the venue was Beijing and not Washington, because Washington has no relations with Tehran.
Right.
So if this deal leads to normalization of wider relations in the region and paves the way for resumption of nuclear deal, that will be a major step forward. We are not there yet.
Clearly, not just in ensuring peace and stability in the West Asian region, but also positive impact on the South Asian region. Dr. Awad, what are the implications that you see particularly for Israel? Do you see this breakthrough actually leading to an end of the years-long war in Yemen?
Well, Teena, I think what is this deal? As I said, it's a win-win situation, and if anything goes in normalization of relations, stabilizing the Gulf region is a welcome step, not only for the region, but for the rest of the world, including India and China. And, they are more dependent on the oil. So oil security, food security, plus the Indian expats in this region is a very prime important for India as well. So therefore, it is a way we should see it in a more pragmatic manner in solving the problem in the region. And now we are opening a platform for a new regional players to play a role in stabilizing factor. Like you're not more dependent on the West and on the United States in dealing with this issue at one angle. The second part where we can see is the Israel and some of the allies are trying to create an arch of an anti-Iranian arch away from the actual problem of the Palestinian issue, which has not been solved. And therefore, by always claiming that Iran is going nuclear and they will not allow Iran to go nuclear and there is an attack, that gives us an indication that the only sabotaging factors in this deal is the United States and Israel, because these are the two countries who are not willing to see a stabilized region, because that is where they always, the military, the industry, the arms are sold to this region in a very large scale, $500 billion deal the United States struck with the Gulf countries. And also We have seen the war in Yemen, the war in Syria, the war in Iran, Iraq, the war also even in Lebanon, and now with Israel tension. So therefore, I think it is a shock for the Israelis, though they are still willing to go and attack Iranian nuclear installation, which is going to be create a havoc in this region. And I think the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region understand that any break of a war in this region, whether it is the United States, whether it is Israel, they are the first to pay the price for it. And that is where the worries is, because most of the American military bases are based on those regions, whether it is in Qatar, whether in Saudi Arabia, Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq. So therefore, Iran have made it very clear for the American and for the allies in the region that any attack on the Iranian installation by the American or their allies, Israel in particular, there will be a retaliatory attack by the Iranian. So I think there we are. Now we have to see it from a global aspects that we need to save peace and security in this part of the world rather than we go and dig and fish in the turbulent water.
Okay. Mr. Parsi, the implications of this deal will gradually be known, but perhaps what looks is that the most important and the most immediate eventual outcome is that it undercuts the Abraham Accords. This is something that a lot of analysts have also spoken about. What do you see as an immediate impact also on the I2U2, something that India, US, Israel and the UAE have been involved with? And there have been reports about differences between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So could that also eventually lead to, undermining of the I2U2?
On the Abraham Accord, I think there's a significant concern right now in the Emirates that this signals an end to the growth of the Abraham Accord, which then puts them in an awkward position. They thought that they were going to be in the lead of this. They would be taking the first step and then all of the other countries would follow. If instead it turns out that they took the first step and no other major power in the Middle East itself, not counting Morocco, follows suit, then instead of this being UAE leading, it ends up becoming an embarrassment for the UAE. I don't think necessarily that is the way things are going to go. It may very well be that MBS's calculation is that by doing this, he has strengthened his negotiating position to later on press for more concessions from the United States in order to normalize with Israel. But in regards to I2U2, I do think India, I agree absolutely with the ambassador, stability in the region is to the benefit of India. India has been seeking stability. However, I think it is important to note that if India enters the region through the I2U2, then India's approach is going to be very similar to that of the United States. It's going to be taking sides in building coalitions of deterrence, etc., which tends to gravitate the problems in the region rather than bringing it closer to peace. And if India does see an emerging competition with the Chinese, then I think it would be unwise for India to enter the region through those avenues instead of doing what the Chinese have done, which is solely to focus on diplomacy and on trade rather than entering into these different military configurations.
Okay, Mr. Azadi, coming to now the kind of progress that both sides need to make in order for this deal to succeed. So as the immediate, outcome, what is it that Iran is expecting through this deal?
The statement that was signed in Beijing pointed to the fact that they're going to exchange ambassadors in 2 months. There were previous agreements between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the 1990s with regard to economic cooperation. Going back to those agreements is going to be part of this deal. And going back to your previous question, Israel is an apartheid state, and entering agreements with Israel is not going to be something good for any country, including India. United States is a country in decline. Entering agreements with the United States, especially when it comes to the Middle East, is not a good policy option. So having bilateral relations, the Iran-India relations obviously is good. I think Iran-India relations is going to improve. Working with important countries in this part of the world is going to be beneficial for India. But bringing countries like Israel that engage in terrorism and violence and kill innocent Palestinians on a daily basis is not going to be a good policy option. I think this agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, we hope, will change the minds of a number of countries in this region, including India, to reassess their alignments, to reassess their foreign policy options, and basically get with the realities of the Middle East today. And I think if they do that, they realize that betting on United States or the apartheid state in Israel is not a good idea.
Okay, Ambassador, of course, India believes in an independent foreign policy, and our approach is always guided by the national interest. But in terms of this deal becoming a reality, in terms of the effective implementation, do you also see some concerns that may come forward? Because both these countries have been rivals for decades. There have been geopolitical tensions. What is it that both sides have to work on? What is the real dispute that they have to address in order for this deal to progress?
We have always stood for better relations between the countries of this region, and we have encouraged this through various bilateral initiatives. I don't think we have a concern of so much about China's role, which has both sides. They are the largest food buyer, and probably India comes second or third. But the concern is that the deal should not lead to simply a cold peace. It should lead to expansion of relations between these two partners. And as I mentioned, if it leads to the resumption of nuclear deal, that will be a very major step forward. I2U2, from our perspective, was never a military alliance. And whatever has come out so far, it's only economic cooperation and in areas like IT and so on. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's a conflict. And let me add that UAE, for instance, which is one of the major pillars of this I2U2, itself is moving towards normalization of relations with Iran. And in fact, it had moved faster. And there has been, the visit of Iranian National Security Advisor Admiral Shamkhani to UAE. So I think this is, on the whole, there are multiple strands which may appear confusing, but as long as the cooperation is stressed over competition and competition is preferred over confrontation, this is something that we will welcome.
But Dr. Awad, the real success will lie in not just signing the agreement, but making sure that it is implemented. That is going to be for the benefit of the region, as you've earlier pointed out. Given the deep distrust between these two countries, and we've seen relations actually bettering and then going from bad to worse over decades. Now, to ensure that this goes on an upswing and there is no mistrust going further, what is it? What are the barriers that you think both sides will have to overcome?
Well, Teena, let's give the credit also not only to the Chinese. Since 2017, they have been pushing their case into the Middle East and the Gulf region. They have been also trying to mediate between Qatar and the Gulf country, but they failed. They continue to speak of mediating between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And let us remember that it is Baghdad and Muscat who played the major role in bringing this deal into onto the open, because 5 years of total negotiation, especially in Oman and Baghdad, where the security arrangement and the understanding between the two countries to build the trust between them was a major breakthrough by the Iraqis and the Omanis. So now, when the culmination of these meetings have taken place and the credit goes now to China, we must understand that there has been a sort of an agreement between the three parties and there is a signing of this agreement. And I think the fallout, immediate fallout, is normalization of relation with Bahrain, with stabilizing Syria, stabilizing Lebanon, and also with other countries before, like Maldives, thinking of normalizing relation with Iran. So all this really give you an indication that is the fallout is very positive, even on the economy of Iran, which has been isolated because the American sanctions. They have already been giving a very positive development. All this development is a sign of a relief for the region, in fact. And I think Saudi Arabia is also benefiting to come back as a leading Arab states. Remember, at the Arab Spring, the fighting between the Arab world is basically the ultimate goal for the vested interest nation is to find the Shia-Sunni divide and fight. And now when you have the two major countries, of one is a Shia leading country and one is a Sunni leading country, and sitting together across the table, I think these are the things we should all look at it from a wider perspective, that this is good not only for the Muslim world, but for the rest of the world.
Okay. Mr. Parsi, I'll take one last comment from you. This, of course, as all of you have pointed out, it's the right and the most meaningful step towards bringing about peace in the region. But what needs to be done in the times to come? What more needs to be done, in fact, to bring about meaningful stability in West Asia? It's been a region which has been under conflict, under tension for several decades. Now, for the future, for the progress of the region, what more needs to be done?
I think it's a very important question, and I would say that this is obviously, as many of the panelists have correctly pointed out, just a first step. This is not solving Saudi-Iranian relations. This is helping managing their tensions. Their rivalry is going to remain, but with this motion, there is now a much better ability to manage it and hopefully move it in the right direction. Ultimately, however, I do not see the region move into an era that is more characterized by peace rather than instability, unless there is an effort to build an inclusive security architecture for the region. That effort has to come from the region itself. It cannot be imposed on it from the outside, but the help and the support of outside powers, such as the United States, such as China, and such as India, I think is going to be very important for its success. The Middle East is one of the few areas in the world that is truly lacking such a security architecture. Almost all other regions have it. And as long as we don't have it, unfortunately, instability is going to be more probable than instability. So while this is a very important step, we have to have higher ambitions, and we have to take advantage of this step towards moving forward towards some form of a security architecture in order to truly capitalize on what has just happened.
Right. So that having been said, we'll have to wind up the program. Time allows me to take up only that much on this edition of the Global Debate. I would like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program today, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. And to you viewers, thank you very much for your time as well. I'll see you same time next week now. Take good care of yourselves. Keep watching Sansad TV.